Hey everybody, we're Shayem and Chris, and this is Fan Team Radio. And we're back after the Australian 2024 Grand Prix. Probably the most exciting one that we've had so far this year. Chris, tell me what you're thinking. What's up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether it was exciting because it was relative to the last few races and I guess the last 20 races we've had of max domination. But I'll tell you what, I'm excited for Australia to come back as the season opener next year because this was interesting from all the different practice sessions to quality to the race. Or, the track just sort of seems like tire deg is high. There's a lot of hard and difficult turns that lead to some craziness. And it really feels like a good season opener for the teams. And yeah, an exciting race, an exciting weekend overall. We have like a lot to talk about, between, what happened with Red Bulls, Ferraris, McLaren, the Williams controversy stuff, the Alonso controversy. Like there's so much that happened this weekend. But yeah, just curious your thoughts on Red Bull to start.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a safe bettor, it would have probably been a terrible week for you to put some money on Max.
Yeah, I
And
lost some fantasy Formula One points. So.
yeah, I mean, it was a great race. Australia always, has been offering some really exciting racing. Last year, if you don't remember, almost half the grid wiped out, which was exciting in its own way. This
Yeah, we got
year,
we got 2 episodes of Drive to Survive on that one track. Yeah.
one for each one for each
Alpine.
Alpine fucking
Yeah.
driver. But yeah, I thought this race was quite fun to watch. I think Sainz has solidified himself as my definitely number two favorite driver behind Lewis Hamilton. So it was all great. When it comes to the Red Bull side of things, let's break it down. So Max had a decent start. He got overtook though in lap 2 by Carlos, and by lap 4, I believe he was experiencing brake duct issues on his back right tire. So it took him out immediately. And then Checo struggled throughout the rest of the race to be able to keep pace with the Mercedes, with the Ferraris and the McLarens, and even at times with Fernando Alonso. So his fight was really towards the front middle pack, which for that car you'd expect more. So a chink in the armor of Checo Perez for this year. He's been having a really good year, but that's also because Max was kind of way ahead of the pack, and Checo was able to capitalize on that. But when left to his own, it seems like he can get ganged up on by a Ferrari that showed really great pace. And yeah, so I don't know. I think if you were to ask me like what I would rate Red Bull's weekend from a scale of 1 to 5, I'd probably put it at like a 2.
Yeah.
An all around, not even just like the Checo performance of it, but just the issues that Max's car faced and how drastic it looks when you kind of put it in perspective of his last 2 years of just having um, dominant racing. So yeah, as a fan, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't Christian Horner had some word. I don't know how much stock people put into this, but he came out and said that Checo had like a tear off lodged under his car, which gave him some loss of downforce. I don't know if that's just sort of Christian Horner's hand wave. Oh, it wasn't his fault. There was a tear off in there. Maybe there's some sabotage going on over Red Bull. Both cars had issues, but
Hey,
yeah, Max.
Chris, this is a missed conversations between Adrian Newey and Ferrari. Ongoing conversations happening right now between Adrian Newey and Ferrari. So if there was a saboteur, I wouldn't look past Adrian.
Could be Adrian, could be Yost, could be Christian himself trying to
Could
take
be
down the team.
Yuki. Could be
Could
Yuki.
be, could be Yuki. No, but yeah, I mean, just uncharacteristic, terrible weekend for Red Bull. Like Max, these things happen, right? According to the telemetry and the data, they said that the brake was stuck from lights out, which, if that's true, is a little mind-boggling because Max had over almost a second on the Ferrari with a brake locked on in the first two laps before he really started incurring the issue. So if the brake was on one tire and he was still pulling out a second, God help the rest of the grid for the rest of the season.
Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on other better news than that.
Yeah. So but we'll see. Like obviously they didn't have a great weekend, but ultimately it led to having a much more interesting race overall and getting to sort of see the other cars shine. And ultimately Carlos might have had the pace to potentially keep up with Max. Who knows? But ultimately, great race with him. And but the whole rest of the grid, the whole rest of the pack was super exciting to watch. And if that comes at the expense of Max sitting out on the sidelines for a race, then so be it. But yeah,
Yeah, sticking to the lackluster side of the spectrum for this week's race, I want to talk a little bit about Mercedes. Obviously, we saw the spectacular beauty of a crash that happened on lap 58 that really took the sails out of Sainz's Parc Ferme entrance. Uh, Mercedes looked really bad. Lewis Hamilton did not look great. Car, the engine failure happened in lap 17, so there's not much you could do about that. But even outside of that, during qualification, and then through practices, and even going into last week, he expressed how he just was not feeling this car. And I think Toto said he wants to punch himself in the mouth for all of this. But again, really frustrating times at Mercedes. Lewis definitely saw this from his conversations with Ferrari and making the switch there. So I I don't want to say definitively that this is going to be pretty much kind of what's going to happen the rest of the season for Mercedes. I really hope that's not the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of where Mercedes is now going to be competing for P4, right? I think McLaren and Ferrari have taken some really heavy steps forward. Obviously, Mercedes and Lewis especially has slower starts to his seasons. He's usually more of a mid-season, latter half of the season kind of guy. But I don't think that's going to be enough. And that was always assuming that he had a really great car underneath him that they would develop. So they don't have that this year. They're probably not going to have that until 2026. I have some hope for 2025. But this year, I'm just going to concede to Ferrari as the P2, de facto contender, and McLaren shortly behind them, and Mercedes, fighting against essentially Alonso in that Aston Martin is, I think, how the cards are settling right now. So, what are your thoughts on Mercedes? Just just based on kind of the similar race experience that they had with Red Bull. Do you think that this was kind of like a one-off that both Red Bull and Mercedes just had like a pretty shit week, um, where typically they are some of the more reliable cars on the track, or do you think that there's enough here for us to kind of guess if this will be an issue going forward?
yeah, Mercedes is a difficult one because they've had domination for so long, and they had the talent to back it up, not only with the drivers but the technical team. Toto is obviously a great team principal, and they've just been kind of shitting the bed lately. And I think they really need to take a step back and look at themselves as a team and sort of start over. Like almost the car is obvious. Whatever philosophy they've been doing with the car in the last few years isn't working. It's again, it's difficult to tell in the first three races because tracks are very different. But the car is being beaten by Aston, which is running the same engine. So it's definitely partial philosophy of the car. And they're going to be losing Lewis, and Lewis has done look shaky. And I don't know whether that's just the car, or whether he just doesn't feel right in the what's the word I'm looking for? The new era of like the downforce, the
Yeah,
four driven downforce.
yeah, the down. Yeah, I guess it's a more downforce centric
Yeah,
cars that they're developing. So yeah, it
yeah,
hasn't sat right with them. Yeah.
yeah. Like the downforce being generated by the four instead of other areas of the car. Maybe Lewis just dominated for so long in different style cars. He's having trouble adjusting to this era. But ultimately, I think Mercedes still has a world class organization. I think they've probably lost some of their talent, some of their technical talent, and they're going to be having a driver change, a major driver change with Lewis leaving, George taking the leadership. Just sort of think that they need to redevelop. And it's kind of weird because 2025 is going to be this transition year where it's like stupid to sort of really develop heavily for George on a year where they're going to just have to throw away that philosophy altogether for 2026. But it'll be a good testing year for George being a leader. So we'll see. I definitely was not hoping that like Red Bull would just dominate without the competition. I was sort of hoping for a 3 to 4 way team race at the top: Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari. But I think Mercedes still needs a little bit of time to develop and get to where they want to be. It's just not working for them.
Yeah, it's frustrating, man. I'm wearing my Aloe hat instead of my Mercedes hat today, so if that tells you anything. But I know we discussed a little bit about kind of how we're going to talk about Carlos Sainz on today's episode. But I think what you mentioned about Mercedes is actually a great way for us to kind of back into the conversation in terms of where should Sainz go now that he's kind of hot commodity and everyone on track has whether they like it or not, been witness to greatness, right? So the situation, and I'll frame it for you, Chris, because I'm really curious to hear what you think about this. So obviously, Stake, and we'll talk about them a little bit later in this episode. Stake, whatever, is a holdover for this year until Audi comes in. But if you think about the foundation that Audi has to pick up, on based on Stake's performance, is quite volatile. I don't think you can make a really confident uh, you know guess as to whether they're going to be successful or not. They might have a Mercedes effect where they come in and just do really well based on the sheer kind of money that they can throw at hiring some really great talent, because that doesn't go against the cost cap. I don't think Sign should go to stake Audi. Just kind of given that volatility, I think his caliber of driver is now appropriate to it's always been appropriate because he's gone to McLaren and Ferrari, but I think now it's more suitable for him to just be at a top team. They know what he can do. He needs the car to be able to do it. He's not just I know Charles has a lot of one lap pace on him, but I think Carlos does have that like that the strategist mind, and he's able to make really decisive decisions. That sounds so redundant. He's a very decisive driver,
Yeah.
and he's able to make these decisions on behalf of himself that I think that Charles just doesn't really do. And we talked about this quite a few times. So, all that to say, Chris, where do you think Sign should go?
First of all, congrats to him. I'm so happy that he destroyed this race coming
Vamos!
off of Vamos, a smooth operation, baby. But yeah, no, coming off of surgery, like I know appendicitis is the surgery's simple these days, orthoscopic and stuff like that, so it's short recovery time. But still, a week or 2 weeks off to be driving at the G's that these guys do is insane, and to turn that into a race win is incredible. So congrats to him. And the sad thing is where I kind of want Carlos to be next year is Ferrari. Like I just think it suits him. I think Charles and Carlos look good together in the Ferraris. They're
They
both
have great team chemistry.
great team chemistry. They both look super, they look the part. They're both talented. They can play off of each other. Ultimately, I think maybe there's a little bit of competitiveness between them, and they favor Charles sometimes, and that kind of annoys Carlos, and vice versa. I just don't see that getting any better with Lewis in there. But if since he does have to go, it's so interesting because I don't want him to be. He's in the prime of his driving life right now. He's on fire. I want to see him in a race winning car. Which, if Mercedes is able to get their shit together, then probably at Mercedes would be my number one pick. The other pick would be potentially Red Bull, but I know he would always be second to Max in that seat. So the only thing left is just some crazy shenanigans happen, and for some reason Red Bull or whoever poaches Oscar or Lando out and put him back into McLaren. But otherwise, I think he would be my prime candidate to take that Mercedes seat and hope that they can build a race winning car again, because I would like to see Carlos destroy George Russell on track.
I mean, he's a bad motherfucker. We talked about this last episode, Chris. Like, did Ferrari make the wrong decision? I know it's too early to say. Still too early to say if we're all being realistic about this, because you know, a lot like Max had to have that unfortunate event for Carlos to capitalize, but it's an opportunistic sport, and if you just have to be in position to strike when possible. Checo
Yep.
didn't do it this week, but Carlos took full advantage, and he really let his stuff shine. So you're right. It's hard to see him in Red Bull because that would probably be the only step up that he can take realistically, kind of given this rule set going into 2026. But what I was thinking that is if Mercedes could potentially sign him on to a 2-year deal, get him through 2025, and let's see what he can do in 2026 with the new developments in spec. Keep Kimi Antonelli on the bring him up as the D3 driver. You're probably gonna have to let go of Mick. Let Kimi come in, just show him that hey, you are gonna we're gonna make sure that we take care of you, while at the same time seeing if iron can sharpen iron in a certain, or with Carlos and George in the same team. There's a big chance for volatility there just because George probably, and rightfully so, it's his team, and he wants to take the throne. But the throne's also earned, right? So if you have Carlos going in there for 2025, 2026 season and just absolutely crushes it, and leaves George in the dust, and it kind of is what it is, right? It's a meritocracy here. Not always, but they try to be. So yeah, I think Sainz's best move is to go to Mercedes, or for his management team to talk to Mercedes. I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting how a lot of the news around Red Bull has kind of gone muted in the last couple of days, don't you think? Almost
Yep.
makes you think that they kind of settle things behind the scenes, don't you think?
Of
Almost
course.
makes you think that Max is probably going to stay, don't you think?
Yeah,
So,
like I never put any credence into that. By the way,
right.
that was his dad stirring the pot, doing some stupid shit, and I
It
think
made, it
Max
made for
had
good
to.
fodder. It made for good
It made for
fodder.
good fodder. It was good. It was good TV. Or and whenever the journalist needed a quote to tweet and everything like that.
Hell, I needed
Oh,
it.
yeah, but as long as Adrian is there, as long as the Red Bull is a rocket ship, Max isn't going anywhere. Could you like Max gets mad, and I mean legit mad, and has to apologize to GP when he's like in first by 20 seconds and the shifts are a little bit wrong. Could you imagine him in a shitbox of a car? Like he would just lose his mind right
He'd
now.
probably just quit and like go buy like a Porsche Carrera and like a team and just do his thing. But
I mean, he would
uh,
just he. Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say he would just go to iRacing. But real quick, I wanted to point out. I mean, granted, he was thrown into the fire and hyped up, but Kimi Antonelli is currently ninth in the standings in F2. Behind a long roster of people that I just don't think he's going to impress. I mean, that being said, Behrman's in 19th, so we saw what he could do.
remember, we did mention that there's not like a one-to-one correlation between like the performance and like the standings of a F2 driver and what they're able to do. I don't think Liam was also very highly like ranked in his F2 career, and obviously Logan wasn't either. So, but there's other, I guess, intangibles that you see. I feel like this isn't a surprise given how training camps work for NFL teams, and how NBA prospects work as well. Like you'll see like D2, D3 players like may not have like the quite the stat line as like some of these D1 players do,
Yep.
but then they go into like the draft after like a 2-year development period. They're like hot stuff, and like you see like all these like NFL like studs who like Travis Kelsey, Jason Kelsey, they're like 1-star recruits, 0-star recruits. So I can see where having like an eye for talent beyond like standings is kind of is important. So I'm not going to put too much credence on where. Where Ollie and Kimia are right now, but that is good to know, right? That they're not
Yeah.
they're no Oscar Piastri. But honestly, Chris, that gives me a little bit of like relief though, knowing that like there isn't a 1-to-1. There is something else there that could, if if you put him in as like a D3 driver and he just crushes it like Ollie did, like Liam did,
Yep.
then you know what you have. And then if he comes in, crushes it for one race, and then you see that he sucks, like it's validation, right? Like we need to be able to wait. Uh, and I talk about validation. We'll talk about Danny Ricciardo later this episode, but there needs to be a space for young drivers that have promise based on what intangibles that those teams have determined to get a time to shine. So I think you don't want to lose Kimmy, right? Remember we talked about it. You don't want to lose him if he is going to be your future. You want to make sure he kind of stays with you. But at the same time, kind of what Christian said when he was asked about the Carlos Sainz a bit is that, hey, we have to look beyond just our stable of drivers. If and currently there's an unemployed one out there that's really kind of shown his stuff. So I again, I don't think Red Bull's going to be the place for him to go. I think he is going to be better served at a Mercedes, but that's also assuming that Mercedes makes some drastic steps forward in the new rules and regulation coming in at 2026. Let's pivot real quickly, Chris. Let's talk about McLaren. I know you have them up here as a point of topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what their race was like. I know that team orders were kind of announced for Piastri to give his spot to Norris. What do you think? Do you think that was right? Do you think that Piastri should have had his chance at the podium?
Yeah, I mean, given the situation, I think it was the right call. I'm going to watch an interview with Zach Brown after the race, and ultimately just came down to tire degradation in this race. I mean, tire deg was so high, I was kind of flabbergasted that people were just on mediums pitting on lap 10. Usually that's like a minimum for softs in a race usually to get your first pit stop, and people are just throwing these boots away like crazy. And unfortunately, Norris just was able to pit after Oscar, and he just had the pace in the hards to, I think it was like almost a half a second a lap faster than Oscar at the time. So it was just sort of that team decision that had to be made. Lando had the pace to catch and pass Charles if there had been 3 to 5 more laps in the race. So I do think it was a good decision. Ultimately, it just came down to, the timing that had to be when Oscar had to pit, when Lando had to pit. It's just a little unfortunate that this was Oscar's home race. An Australian had never been on the podium before. And if things worked just slightly differently, we would have finally cracked that and had Oscar on the podium. But if you go back and look at it, Lando is still their kind of number one driver. And unless Oscar is showing massive dominance over Lando, they'll still probably prioritize him in the end until something changes. But ultimately, an amazing performance by McLaren. They were able, they surprised, I think, even themselves, getting someone on the podium. And where did Oscar end? P4?
Yeah, Oscar's P4, Lando P3.
Yeah, so I mean, they basically couldn't ask for anything better for the weekend. Great result, and it's just unfortunate with the tire deg that it had to be Lando instead of Oscar. But it is what it is. Great result either way.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I'm not the biggest Lando guy. I think he's a good driver, but I just think that I think
Was
he's
that
gonna
was that
have.
was that you screaming from the balcony? Did you see that clip? Someone yelled at Lando as he was walking back to the
And
pits. He was like,
flipped him off.
When are you gonna win a race?" He fucking flipped him off. Was that
Flipped him
you?
off. I mean, I wish that was me. I'd love to say something. I'd probably add a couple of cuss words in there, but if you look at the if you look at the difference in time, Lando ended up having over like a 35-second gap to Oscar, which you know. Again, that was after the fact that George absolutely demolished his car on the last lap of the race. So it's hard to tell, but it's one of those things where I know it was a hard decision for Zach and for Andrea Stella and for the management team there to probably make that call, and have Oscar trade places with or give his place to Norris. But Lando just came off of fresher tires and he had pace. I think that if the roles were reversed, they would have probably did the same thing, right? So I really do give them some points on making just a tough decision there, but a necessary one. So I'm not gonna scorn them too much, but again, it would have been damn cool to see Oscar Piastri, be on the podium on an Australian, GP weekend. That would have been super sick.
Yep.
Um, but he's young. We'll see more of Oscar, going forward, and hopefully, the next time around he'll be on the better end of things.
Absolutely.
I have one thing to. Do you have anything else to say about McLaren?
No, just good weekend, and I guess the last thing I'll add is I hope that they keep up their pace. Right. I hope that they are able to basically continue the performance week after week, and we get to see more of them on the podium.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. If I had to rate them this week, I'd probably give them a 4 out of 5. A 5 out of 5 being that they both were on the podium, but that's reserved for another team, and they start with an F. So I did want to ask this. We talked a little bit about the bright stars in the sports, Red Bull and Mercedes having lackluster weekends. We've talked about stars in the sports, Ferrari and McLaren really delivering. Let's talk a little bit about the guys that are typically on the back end of the track and what's happening there, right? So we're going to talk about Haas a little bit more later on, but something that kept coming up in my mind is the Io Komatsu effect here, right? I know some of this had to do with luck of the draw and things happening in the race that really helped K Mag and Hulk get into points, but you know, in respects to how these guys have been performing over, the past 7, 8 years, this is the best that I've seen them at. Like, this is the most confident that I've seen them driving, and this is the first time I've seen their idea of using two veterans in seat working without having like a younger driver, right? Obviously, that's probably going to change with this Ollie Behrman story, but this season seems to be a very stable one. If I were to put an adjective to it, and I think I, this is me speculating, but I'd like to think that Io Komatsu has had a lot of influence on that. Tell me if you think differently. But if you don't think differently, Chris, I also want to ask you, how does this reflect on Gunther, who is now looking for quote unquote the right project to pursue? Do you think that this kind of puts do you think this is totally disassociated from Gunther and has nothing to do with him? Do you think it's a continuation of Gunther's legacy being realized? Or do you think this is something that this is the kind of drastic pivot that Haas needed to make, and that Io Komatsu is actually leading them closer to the promised land that than Gunter could have ever done.
Yeah, this is something that's been on my mind for a little bit, and I think I really it came to fruition when I saw the post race interview with Gunther asking the questions. It just nobody could understand him, and it seemed to be a little awkward. But after watching Drive to Survive and all of that, I've always had the inkling, and I love the guy, and I love his personality and kind of what he did for the sport and how he rose the level of it on Drive to Survive. But I just don't think Gunther was a great team principal. We saw a little bit of that in Drive to Survive, where he didn't really understand the technicalities of the car, and he just always had the phone with Gene, and just always sort of seems to have a negative attitude, like what the fuck, that kind of thing, waiting for something bad to happen and reacting to that, versus being a leader, like someone like James is doing right now with Williams. And I just think ultimately Gunther didn't have that sort of inspirational aura about him to take the team around him and get everybody going. I used to play softball, and whenever we had a good, a good team captain running the team, you want to wake up, you want to come to practice, you want to go try, and you want to try to win. And when everything's kind of a mess and the team's sort of a mess, and you just like don't care. You don't show up some days. You go whenever. You just kind of play. And that's kind of feel like where Haas was at. Like they didn't have a lot of direction. There wasn't a lot of inspiration, and Gunther was always just sort of negative and using his personality to sort of drive sort of the motivation behind the team. And now I feel like, and I don't know what it's like with the new team principal, but my guess is there's probably some changes, things starting to feel a little bit better, and then like that's going to spiral all the way down to the drivers, and then Nico and Kevin are going to maybe be like, well, shit, things are going to start changing. I want to maybe keep my seat next year. So you drive a little bit harder, you make a little bit more effort. And, like you said, you have to capitalize in this sport, but they were there and they capitalized. And, Magnuson was on, I think actually both of them were on Albon's gearbox in the race at some point.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's I think what lap was it? I think it was on. Yeah, lap 45 is where Magnuson makes that really deep. Did you see that was a nasty dive?
Yeah.
Really deep dive from like 100 meters away to
Yeah.
overtake Albon, and Albon was like, "What the fuck was that?" So I mean, Magnuson doesn't really have what you call conventional driving styles. If that's I've been able to pick that up from him is that he will do
Yeah.
whatever the fuck he wants. He still has that kind of bad boy. Dude, you know what I think? They're like, when they got Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon together, and they're like, oh my god, like, is this gonna, like, what's gonna happen here? There was a little bit of that happening with the Haas whenever they brought K Mag over, and suck my balls, mate, like that whole saga.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and these guys, now that they're dads, they're just like, all right, like, we're just gonna shut up and chill and help each other out, right? And like just be cool off track. Which leads me to believe, I think what's gonna help Alpine succeed is if Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon starts having kids.
Yeah. Completely.
That
Or
that and if
kids
Bruno
plus
Famine wasn't their team principal anymore.
kids plus removing your appendix could be great.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that too. Yeah, it really shaves some seconds off of your time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, man, I definitely think that Ayo Komatsu really stood on business, as the kids like to say, when it comes to following that Mercedes model of under promising, over delivering. I think I would love to hear his calls with Gene. After races like these, I really hope Drive to Survive keeps on, the trope of I got to call Gene, but like in a better way, right? Like he's delivering good news. Like I want to hear what that looks like because for so long, like we've just been writing them off, preemptively even, right? Like we didn't really give them a chance because we know like they're just not going to do anything with it. We talked about, potentially, you know, Andretti buying them out and how much we'd be a fan of that, right? And now it seems like they have taken, they've actually switched seats with Alpine. So I mean, I would love to see this continue. Again, really early in the season, don't want to put all my eggs into their basket, but I did think it was interesting to see how once Gunther has left and Io Komatsu came in and really said like those I guess they came off as disparaging, but they're actually very honest and realistic in terms of like, hey, I don't think our car is going to be spectacular, but we're going to do what we can, what we got to bring performance up incrementally. And he's been delivering, whether it's through circumstances outside of their control. It's an opportunistic sport, right? So you gotta be there to strike while the iron's hot. Um, Cool. So, Chris, I'm gonna let you introduce the other below the line teams and kind of get your thoughts on them before I go in on them.
Yeah. I want to talk about Williams a little bit because the high level is I hate Logan Sargent. I want him out of the sport. I don't think he's great. And I'm actually a big Albin fan. Maybe slightly less this year than I was in previous years, but I'm still a big Albin fan, and I think Williams has a lot of upcoming potential. But I don't necessarily agree with the whole chassis situation, um, and I'm curious about your thoughts on it. But Albin's the one who wrecked his car, and this team, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's financials, didn't have a spare chassis to fix Albon's car, so they gave him Logan's car. And I mean, that's what a crazy public statement to say this guy's out. Like it kind of feels like shit. I don't know if you heard Max Verstappen's comments that he was like, if that was me and I'd already be on a plane home already.
He
Like
said I'd flatten my
like
car so no one could use it. That's
yeah,
what he said.
like
He's like, if that was me, I would have fucking flattened my car so no one could have touched it. Like, fuck that.
yeah, like so he said both those things. And I kind of felt the same. I'd be like, like Logan's obviously being a consummate professional, saying like it is what it is. Like I'm here for the team, but you know, deep down inside, he's like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. So it's just one of those things that
Hey man,
I don't.
it's situational. And okay, here let me start from the James Vowell's response to this. First of all, probably the most eloquent response that I've heard from a team principal on such a tough question, right? And the way that
Right.
he presented it didn't put any shade against Logan at all. He actually called Logan like a world class athlete or something to that effect, which I laughed at. But I feel like I literally like have been at the 24-hour fitness with athletes that are way better than Logan Sargent, but whatever. I think first of all, I think James Vowles is related to Benedict Cumberbatch somewhere in the lineage of time. Um, I think that he put it best when saying Logan is great. He hasn't done anything wrong, but we need to be able to get as many points as we can given that the top teams are going to run away with most of them, and we're left with a really small bucket of points. We meaning the back of the pack teams, and for us to be able to go up in rankings in respects to last year, it's it's going to be by margins, right? Whereas the front of the pack, there's going to be like dozens and dozens of points separating first, second, third, or maybe not so much, just kind of based on Ferrari's trajectory. But in the back of the pack, that only leaves them with like 1 or 2 point that's going to separate them, and those are the 1 or 2 points that's going to be critical for them to chase after. Not just at the end of the year, they need to keep thinking like that from the start of the year. And if Albon is putting the car during race, like the race where where it's supposed to be, then honestly, man, if this happened again later on in the year and Albon crashed his car, I would but Albon's been doing really good and putting up consistent points up until then, and Logan still hasn't done any of that, and this happened again later on in the year, I'd totally be fine with them doing the same exact thing. Because the thing is, if Logan, and again, this is situational. Because let's take another team for example. Let's say this happened to, let's say this happened to Mercedes, right? Both drivers are more or less on equal standing. If it happened at Ferrari, both drivers are more or less on equal standing. Even if it happened at Red Bull and Max crashed his car, I think they would have kept Checo in there. The thing is, these guys have all proven they can score points. Logan hasn't even reached that floor threshold yet. And hate's a strong word, Chris. Like, I know we really don't hate anyone on the grid as like a person,
Yeah,
but in
for
terms
sure.
of just the driver like kind of caliber, yeah, I think he is below line. I think that he has had time to kind of make a name for himself and to show some promise, and he just hasn't, and that's just the game, and I think it's in this situation he has to take a back seat and just let like for the team. I There's nothing that he's done that gives him um, that kind of power within the organization that puts him on equal footing as Albon, right? I guess another interesting case study would be Aston Martin. If Fernando, crashes his car out, does or sorry, if Stroll crashes his car out, do they give it to Fernando? No, and not vice versa either. But that's because like Lance's dad owns the team, so
Yeah.
like even though they're not like literally on equal footing in terms of talent, there's another factor that kind of needs to be considered for them, right? Um, I just think the disparity between uh, honestly, man, the only other team I think that this kind of thing would make sense for is VCarb, because Daniel hasn't done shit, and I've literally looked at like the comments after VCarb like posted their IG stories and everything. We'll talk a little bit more about Daniel later, but VCarb is the only other team I can see where if Yuki crashes his car in qualifying, I wouldn't blame them if like they were like, "Hey, Danny, like give your car to Yuki for the race coming up," you know? Like because they're also vying for those really slim margin points that's going to give them a boost up in the rankings or worse boost down or downgrade, right? So those are my thoughts. I don't disagree with them. It's a tough position. I think James Val put it as best as he could, and I have no reason to not put my faith into James Val because he's been leading the team in the right direction, even though it is unfortunate. I will say, I hope that I was hoping that Alex would capitalize on it more than he did, especially with the two DNFs and Stake having like such a shitty pit stop, experience. I really thought Albon was going to show up a little bit more. So I totally get what you mean by you were more of a fan of him last year than you were this year. So I was hoping for that
I
as
mean,
well.
it's. I mean, I'm still a fan. I don't see I don't see the level of drive that I did last year, and maybe that was just because he was standing so far out, and it's hard to compare against Logan. But the only counterpoint I'll make real quick is that, and this only works from Logan Sargent's point of view in his shoes, is that if James Valls comes to you and says, "Hey, sorry, Logan, we love you, et cetera, but we're giving the chassis to Albin," then as Logan, I would say to him and be like, "Listen, I'm here fighting for my seat. We're all, not, we all know the news that like I need to perform, I need to score points, I need to get better, and the less time in the car that I have, the less chances I have to prove that to you." And so, unless your decision is already made and you already have written me off and I'm already gone from the team, in which case, why am I even here at the moment? Then I need to be in the car to be able to prove to you. And that's how I would have positioned it as Logan said, give me the opportunities to score the points unless I'm the one making the mistakes because I'm fighting for my future here. Now, I
Yeah.
get it. I totally agree with James's point of view. You have to make that call. Granted, every other team probably had a spare chassis with them. It was just Williams. I don't know, ultimately why that happened. I think the announcers were talking about that it was weird for them not to, considering they were just in Jeddah, where walls are closed. There's close walls in Australia, so you can sort of potentially have to plan for a big crash. So I don't know why that was, but ultimately they didn't have it. They had to make the decision. I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it's fully on point. It just really sucks as a human being perspective from Logan Sargent that you've basically been publicly told you're done. And that, this guy, even though we wanted Nick DeVries gone too, it just feels the same thing. You train your whole life for something and everyone, the whole universe says, you're not good enough, kid. Go home.
Hey, it's the
It's
life of an
brutal.
athlete. That's the life of that's the route you choose. Like
Yeah, it's just brutal, it's just
that's the
brutal.
life you choose, man. And honestly, like I said, if this happened again in it's a long season. It's only race 3. There's still like 21 more races to go. It's going to be the longest season
Yeah.
in F1 history. There's time for him to redeem himself. But like I said before, the idea or the strategy of fighting for those marginal points if you're the back half of the grid, that you can't just have that trigger like later on in the season. You need to have that consistently starting from the top, and I think that requires discipline that James Val's really like from the top down, right? We talk about leadership from top down and expelling that across the entire organization. I think he's the first person to do that. That that's like a part of his like being, is like putting you know, uh, like what we call OKRs or business goals, and then having a strategic plan, as conservative as it is going to be the most stable plan to get these guys where they are with the amount of money that they have. So, again, if Albon scored points consistently throughout this year, Logan still is on a track record of not scoring anything, and this happened again later on in the year, like say like race 10 or 15, I would totally be fine with them doing the same exact thing.
That being said, we had both Mercedes go out of the race. We had Max Verstappen go out of the race, and we had Fernando Alonso with the 20-second time penalty, and Albon still didn't score motherfucking points. So,
So who knows? Just probably it's probably just a bad week for Williams,
bad,
and and sometimes it be like that, you know.
It's a bad week
So
for Mercedes power unit cars.
yeah, you know. But let's talk about something else that's bad. Let's talk about steak pit crew. So the average pit time allotted for this track, and I think most tracks is about 13 seconds, right? Coming in, getting your shit done, getting out, getting back in to the race. There is I think a visual that they showed where the average pit stop for this race was 23 seconds. And I'm like, that's probably because Steak took like 3 minutes for each of their drivers to get their shit switched in the pit crew. They look terrible, man. They look like so elementary. They look like they just got their like guns for hire, right? Like really bad ones, right? And and I feel like everyone that's on that pit crew is probably like not going to be there next year, anyways. And Audi's probably not going to sign any of them. So it was just it seems like Valtteri is just checked out. You know, he's kind of just letting his mullet grow. I don't think Zhou Guan Yu really like is a vocal type of person, right? I think he's really just enjoying like kind of like the glamorous side of the F1 lifestyle, which you know, if you're not winning on track, might as well be winning off track, right?
Sure.
So they were an embarrassment to watch. What do you think about this? What do you think about stakes? I just want to hear like how did you think it was funny? Did you think it was actually like really concerning? Like, are you able to just write them off?
I mean, you talked a little bit about before about Haas last year being the sort of the team you don't know exists, and that's what Stake, Sauber, Kick, whatever it is for me this year. Like, if the car wasn't neon green, nobody would even know that they're there, and they don't get any TV time. They don't really do anything. You know, Joe came in as a the first Chinese driver either ever in a long time. I can't remember which, but and then my favorite driver of all time in F1, Valtteri. It's just such a sad situation, and I get it. At the time, it was either Williams or Alfa Romeo at the time, and you kind of had to pick your battles. And Fred was leading that team, and obviously, he might have been a good choice for team principal. Now he's leading Ferrari to great success. But I don't know what's going on at this team. I think maybe the organization knows that they're being overtaken and sold, and there's just no incentive to try. Like, maybe the executives at the upper echelons are just riding this out, going to take their bonuses, and not really innovating, making aggressive hires and training their team, because what's the effing point with Red Bull doing what they do? So ultimately, when I was watching this is the third race in a row that they've screwed up the pit stops like this. The
It's
first time it was
terrible.
Valtteri. Yeah, like it's a joke. Like 30-second plus pit stops in three different races with four times. It's just I it's almost it's like Mazepin bad. Like like what is going on? So I
It,
just feel bad for the team, but I it's kind of embarrassing. Just don't even show it on TV, honestly.
It feels like they just went out and outside of the drivers, they just got a temp agency to hire everyone else that even the team principal Alessandro Bravi. Like I didn't really even know about him. Like I know a decent amount about the other team principal just because by virtue of us talking about them so much, you know. And whether it's good or bad, like they're there, you know. And I don't know, I don't know shit about Alessandro Bravi, you know, other than the fact that he was at the team when they were Alfa Romeo. But yeah, it really seems like they just went out on the streets and they're like, "Hey, do you guys fit? Like, what's your t-shirt size? Like medium?" And then they just put fucking like lime green shirts on everyone, just like get in there, you know, just do your thing. Yeah, it's a blunder of comedies with those guys. I really do think what you just said, like. Other than the fact that their car is lime green, no one would know they're even on the track. I feel like that they knew that going into this year, Chris. That's the sad thing. I think the reason they did that is because of what you just said.
Yes, exactly. I that thought ran through my head, but yeah, I don't. Ultimately, it's one of those things. Like, they're probably not going to improve until Audi take over, and who knows how long it'll take Audi to do that. But
I
if
mean,
you're
they're
going to
not
be in
working with great
F1,
bones. They're not
yeah,
working
not
with
working
great
with great.
bones.
Just but it's fucking F1 still. Try. You know, you're in the pinnacle of motorsport here. Do your job.
Yeah, that's it was just funny to see. They're gonna show up again on this next bracket of ours. But let's talk winners this week, Chris. Who are your winners this week?
Yep. Smooth operation, man. Carlos Sainz had a great weekend overall. The guy just looks, I'm scared to see after he fully heals if he's able to even extract more pace out of the car. I've always sort of put Carlos in in the back of my head above Charles a little bit in terms of race pace, not maybe not fully qualification pace, but he's got that head on his shoulders. He's got that good strategy instincts about him, and I just ultimately think we're going to see a really solid Carlos and a little maybe regretful Fred Vasseur at the end of the year potentially. Although I don't know how much of the Hamilton deal was about star power and other things of that nature instead of just putting points on the board, because Lewis obviously brings a lot of intangibles from that aspect to a global brand like Ferrari. That being said, Carlos, great weekend. I really want to see more of him. Between him and Max, the only two drivers to win a race basically in the last like what 20 something races.
Yeah,
So Carlos, hats off to you, man. I hope to see you on the podium more often. And then Yuki, Yuki had a great race, and he really cemented himself as the team, the dominant part of the team, and kind of made Danny Ricciardo look really bad in his home turf. And I just really think that Yuki, I don't know. I don't think he's good enough for Red Bull, so I don't know where he goes from here. But that being said, it's really good to see him improving. He seems like he has his mental game really improving. I think Helmut Marko came down on him for his sort of outburst a couple races ago. I really think he's sort of reining it in and trying to be that leader for the team. So I think Yuki had a great weekend, and ultimately, I'm excited to see where he ends up the season. But I think he's going to consistently outperform Danny for the rest of the year.
yeah, I don't disagree with you, especially on the Freddie Vasseur part. I think the relationship between Lewis and then specifically John Elkin really drove that. I would say Freddie Vasseur is a winner this week for me, as well as Carlos Sainz, in the fact that he is able to go in there. Remember when we talked about this last year, Chris, when he first got the job, like we didn't really have full faith in him. Coming from Alfa Romeo, we thought he was very like. His more of a not lackadaisical, but more whimsical, I guess, kind of aura, which it was just hard to see that working really well in Ferrari. But turns out maybe that's just what they needed, right? And they're striking such a good balance between team principal, two drivers, and their pit crew and their strategists and everyone back at their factory. Like it's a I'm the biggest Lewis Hamilton fan, right? But I can definitely see that causing a ripple in something that's already progressively building on itself. And the concern is, do they take a couple steps back? So I think Freddie Vasseur has done a really great job of just being opportunistic, making sure that his drivers are in place to capitalize. He did downplay a little bit in the post race conversations on Carlos's success, because I don't think he just wanted to take on all that questioning that was going to come after that. But yeah, hats off to Freddie Vasseur. Hats off to Yuki. I agree. Yuki had. Um, I feel very satisfied watching Yuki just kind of put a bigger gap between himself and Danny Rick, specifically because of the people that comment on Danny Rick being like the Messiah, like and coming back and I just don't think that's going to happen, right? So I totally agree with you. Carlos, Freddie V, and Yuki Tsunoda are my winner circle. I have to put in Haas, like just absolutely crushed it this week. Both drivers in points again. Some of it was outside of control, but they struck where they could. They're up to 4 points. They're ahead of Alpine. They're ahead of Williams. They're ahead of Stake. So they're really putting themselves in that P6 position to get P6 this year if they keep. If they keep just being consistent and stable. And I think Kevin Magnuson talked a little bit about that, how stability and just consistency is really all they can ask for this year. And I think Ayo Komatsu is the right guy to pull them in the right direction. Um, I guess I can talk a little bit about our losers since we probably have similar losers. But I talked about Stakes Pit Crew. I think they're terrible. I don't think that they deserve to be on the grid. I think they need to do more practicing off the grid, and that's something that they can practice because it's changing tires. Um, and Mercedes, I put him in the loser circle this week. Even if Lewis didn't have his engine blow out, I don't think he would have been competitive. Still, I think he would have been fighting at very best against Checo and Alonso, and I think Alonso and Checo would have both overtaken him. I think George would have overtaken him. I think he would have been in a fight against like Hulkenberg and shit like that. So the car just doesn't sit well with him. George, whether or not Alonso's double braking kind of affected him. It still put George in the wall, so no points there for them to collect this week. So it was a tough week for Mercedes. Who are your losers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you on the Lewis front. Lewis just doesn't seem to be all there at the moment, struggling with the car heavily. And, Mercedes overall had just like a bad weekend, as you mentioned. George crashing for the third time in a row, each time Carlos winning those races. So, what a crazy stat. Like, as long as Carlos keeps on winning, George will keep on crashing. But in the last two, we're both in the last lap as well, which is crazy.
I guess
Singapore last year.
the voodoo dolls wherever they are in the world are just so close to each other that when you prick one, it kind of goes through and pricks George's voodoo doll also. So I don't
It's
know.
got to
I
be.
just yeah, there's got to be some sort of cosmic effect on that stat line.
Yeah, we'll see if Carlos keeps winning races. We'll see what happens next time with
George is probably
George's voodoo.
gonna
But
George is probably gonna end up with like $27 million in like damages to the car by the end of the year if that happens.
100%. Yeah, the other loser, I put Max on there not because I think it's going to ultimately affect the season, but I think he's going to have to wait till next year to do a 100% win record for all the races. So, I kind of want, he was going for another 10 wins in a row, breaking the record that he broke last year. So, ultimately, I'm glad it happened in the first lap because I think he was able to keep a much calmer head. That if it happened Azerbaijan style in the last couple laps of the race, but yeah, ultimately,
To his credit, it seemed like he kept a pretty cool head about it. He didn't seem like he just got like spun out of control and just like, you know, he seemed like he was able to explain what he's experiencing post race and kept a cool head. So I don't know. Maybe
yep,
he's about to have a kid.
maybe, but yeah, no. Well, I'll move into my hot seat, and I think we both agree. I think Danny Rick is in huge trouble, and I watched in the post race interview with him, and we talked last week about we're kind of over his, I have something to prove and stuff like that. And the post race interview with him was just even more awkward. He's like, he goes, I know what everyone's thinking and everything like that, but like it's not that. It's not that I've lost confidence and all that. It's something else. And it was almost like making excuse after excuse after excuse for like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still the Danny Rick that can win races. I promise, we're good. It's just for whatever reason, some voodoo out in the world, it hasn't happened yet. And I'm like, at some point, he's no longer smiling. He's no longer happy and energetic. He just always looks defeated. And I just think that's a whole part of the problem. And it may be like a self sabotage sort of thing. Maybe he's mad that he's not in Red Bull and he thinks like, oh, why is it me? Why am I in this crap? Whatever, whatever. But he's definitely not the old Danny Ricky used to be. And I just don't think he has that anymore. Unfortunately, like you said, the sport is cutthroat, and that's the name of the game. And I think Danny Rick is on his last season of F1.
So for anyone listening that's a basketball fan, and now we're to make a comp, Danny Ricardo is Ben Simmons. Chris, that might not mean a whole lot to you, but if you're a
Max.
basketball fan, you'll know exactly what I mean. Danny Rick, I like him because I really like him because it was his story that like really got me compelled to coming back into F1 as a fan, right? So it's hard for me to say that like he doesn't have add value, but there are only 20 seats on the grid. There's obviously talent that's like oozing at the to get in, and they've proven themselves. This just seems like they're trying to artificially like just placate to some base that they think is going to grow more. I don't think the Daniel Ricciardo fan base is going to grow anymore. I think that bubble has popped a long time ago. I think that bubble needs to you need the only way to maybe reconstruct and get more fans on board via the Daniel Ricciardo train is to make him a commentator, make him someone like that give him that option to get out of the sport in a graceful way, but do something like David Coulthard does. Like it's you're putting this man in a situation where if you tell a driver, hey, like, do you want to keep driving? He's gonna keep doing it until he proves something. Not everyone's like Sebastian Vettel. But you need to be able to prove your worth to the team and why you're on the grid, right? Yuki's just been outdoing him. I was looking at the Instagram like posts from Vista Cash App RB and Danny Ricardo and all the like the all the fans of Danny Richter are like, you could do it, Danny, you could do it, like, and then all the other camp of people that are just like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, he hasn't done it at all. And
Yeah.
in the first bucket, people are just like, they're like, hey, any excuse is going to be a good excuse for Danny Rick. Any excuse that like most excuses that you wouldn't use for other drivers if they were like in a similar position, I feel like. And they're really pulling at strings, right? And then you have uh the other side of the camp, which I guess I fall into more, is that, hey, you've had some bad lucks. That is a part of the sport. Other people have had bad luck in the sport too, and they've come back. Fucking Lance Stroll broke his hand and was able to still make points, right? This dude, what did he come in at this past week? He came in at Lance came
P6,
in
I
at
think.
P6, he got 9 points for his team. He's ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So I know we give Lance a lot of shit, but like even when we're uh, kind of uh, comparing Danny Ricardo's floor or Danny Ricardo's potential, we're always doing it against like the floor of the grid, right? Like Lance Stroll being one of them, and he can't even get up to that. So if he can't do that, like, what are we doing? Like, yeah, what did he finished P12. He beat an Alpine team that is overweight and underperforming. He beat a Kick Sauber team that have like 3+ minute fucking pit stops. He beat a Mercedes team where both cars didn't finish, and he beat a Max Verstappen whose car didn't finish. Those are
Right.
the people that he beat. Like, it's just, I don't know in what world these guys like that are in the Danny Ricardo camp of like, let's just keep on keeping on, and he'll leave whenever he wants to. That's total bullshit, dude. I think it's a detrimental space to put him in. I think a more gracious way is to be like, hey, Danny, we know it's not working out, man. Let's find you another place in F1 that you can naturally shine in, and that we can grow our marketing with you. Again, F1 fucking sucks at packaging their content together. Like, you don't have to look past the opening title grid to see that. But this is yeah, I feel really strongly about this, Chris, if you couldn't tell already, because when you have people like Liam and Ali and even Kimi Antonelli or Felipe Dragovic, who I called Peter in our last episode, so I want to clear that up with people. I did not mean to call him Peter Dragovic. His name is Felipe. But these like drivers that can't go back into F2 because they already, like, some of them have already won championships in the F2 series, so they can't go back to it. You need to cut the guy loose. You need to give him a gracious way out, because he did do a lot for the sport in terms of bringing eyeballs in. But now it's past the point of saturation. There are other people that you can use, like Ollie Behrman. I think I don't know if you saw it, but his like Instagram before was it Abu Dhabi, right, or Saudi Arabia? Sorry,
So,
his
yep.
Instagram before Saudi Arabia was like, I don't know, it's like 300,000, maybe 400. It went past 1 million within like that day, you know.
Yeah.
And that's like what can happen. Like the machinations of social media work in those predictive ways, right? F1 social media, and this is not just F1 social media, but all the social medias for every single F1 team, super corny, super lame, tone deaf, and just not well packaged together. And I think that's what's leaving room open for such scrutiny on Danny that, like, his soul's gonna get broken, right? By the time this is all
I,
said and done. But that's just me, bro. That's just me. What do you think?
I I will say that Alpine had one of the most amazing tweets of all time in during the last race. I don't know if you saw it or not, but they tweeted a one simple line and said double overtake on Max Verstappen, which was like really freaking hilarious because I was laughing so hard because it was just so ridiculous that they posted that. But
They're
you
just
know,
like, we need to put something up, you know?
it almost feels like, coming from Hollywood, from both of us, that they're treating F1 in the last couple of years like Hollywood treats IP. Like they're too scared to go to new talent. They're too scared to go to new things, so they want to rinse and repeat the proven concepts of the proven IP. And I think that's what happened with Danny is like, hey, we have this guy who's built a brand. Everybody loves him. He does shoeies when he wins races, and the smile is captivating. And he was the star of Drive to Survive the first couple seasons, and he's got this amazing story. And if we could just have this comeback story from this proven talent, it'll be the best thing that's ever happened to F1. And trying to make something happen that just isn't there. And now, honestly, they've kind of I think that PR role in Red Bull was like his best spot for a while to sort of be in there, reconnect with everybody, get that aura back. And he did, but that was only half a season. They kicked Nick out, put him right back in the seat. And now we're seeing this like sort of depression overflow him again. He's back to where he was when he was struggling with McLaren. And I think that's ultimately going to ruin his potential future chances of being a charismatic presenter and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm a little worried for that as well. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think Danny's done. I think we both feel pretty strongly on that. And again, like you said, there's only 20 seats, and we have so much talent waiting in the wings. And I'm gonna, we said it before, but I think 2025 is gonna be a bloodbath. I think we're gonna lose like at least five of the drivers on the grid, which is insane considering nobody left this year, no driver changes. Boom, everyone's gonna be gone. But that's the way it is.
That's how the sport goes. I think if we were to pull a little bit more on the metaphor of Hollywood, I think the hope for all teams is kind of like essentially what happened to Hulkenberg, right? He stuck around for a while. Haas didn't really have a whole lot of options when they brought him on. And look at him now, like he's like really putting, there is a comeback story of sorts to happen. Fernando Alonso is an outlier to that, I feel like. I don't think he ever lost touch with his groove. But, sticking with that Hollywood metaphor, you know, Lauren Mekies isn't Quentin Tarantino, and Danny Ricardo isn't David Carradine, right? Like, there's not enough talent to bring him back to where he was. And Lauren Mekies, like, I don't think is the guy to be able to do that. I think Lauren Mekies does a really good job of making sure that they have a car available, that the mechanics are like, or the engineers are kind of helping progress performance as much as possible, and that Yuki Tsunoda is like at least has a car that he can get points with, and that's all they can really offer to Danny Ricciardo. It's not like Lauren Mecky's gonna be like, "Hey, Danny, let's forge a relationship here." You're like on the back end of your career, and I'm just starting as the team principal. Let's figure something out. There's no affinity there either. It's not like Christian Horner's coming in and being like, "Hey, Danny, I have my own team to run, but I'm gonna come in here and talk to Lauren and like advise you." This is not going to happen in an ongoing kind of fashion, right?
Sure.
So yeah, he's in our hot seat. I don't think that he's going to be able to make it out of this season. unless he makes a drastic change in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say is I think he will probably finish the season out, just because I think Liam would rather wait for the bloodbath to happen and see where he could potentially end up. There's a rumor out there already that Checo has already signed his contract for next year. I don't know if I believe that or not, just because there's going to be so much back and forth between all these drivers and teams, and I think actually we're going to be playing this game of musical chairs where the team principals are going to be kind of waiting for other teams to figure out what they're doing before they, because I don't think Toto wants to rush to sign Carlos just in case there's another driver. Like, who knows what's going to happen? But ultimately, I think next year is going to be crazy. But before next year, we have the next race. So yeah, I think we have a week off, right? So then we're gonna go to Japan.
Yep, Japanese GP is going to be on the 7th. It's going to be really early for us here on Sunday. It's going to be at, I think, the stroke of midnight turning Sunday.
Yep.
And then we're back to our normal schedule, obviously, with free practice happening on Friday and qualifying happening on Saturday. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Always a great race. The Japanese fans always show up and show out. The trajectory that Yuki's going. I'd be really excited to see him, go into high points, maybe snag a P5, and really build that trust in his drivability within the organization. And who knows, man? Maybe he becomes a hot commodity this year. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, he's never scored points in Japan before, so I really hope he gets to do that and in front of his home crowd. And I think he's very much poised to be able to do that. But I'm really excited about the race. We have a really close. I know it's the beginning of the season, and we've had a DNF from Max, but we have a really close drivers' championship. There's only 11 points between Carlos and Max. Max sitting at 51, Carlos at 40, and then we have Sergio and Charles in the mix in between them. So I think it's going to be tight between them. Red Bull and Ferrari are tight on the constructors' championship. So Japan is a beautiful race. It's a great race. It's a great track and a great country to race in. So I'm excited to see how we shake up, and maybe we'll get some even more craziness at the start of next week. We'll really throw into the mix of the future or the rest of the year and see what could happen for each for everybody. So I'm excited for it. Unfortunately, we have a week off, but it is what it is.
Hey, maybe that won't be the case in 2 years when they're going to have 30 races on the calendar
I
year.
think
So
I think NASCAR does like 35 races a year, but I don't.
a stock car though, man. A stock car, they stay within the states. Very different logistics there.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I don't know anything about NASCAR, but I'm assuming that they stay mostly in the US. So
Yeah, I mean U.S. and I think they have like one Mexican, race that they do. But yeah, they still need to refine the calendar in F1 and make sure that they're tightening up that geo kind of pool of races, so it's the most efficient. And then in doing so, they should bring back V10s. That's all I'm saying. Well, we're
I,
gonna be
I'm
back, huh?
yeah. I was gonna say that's the best idea. It's like I want those V10s because let me tell you something real quick. When we went to Coda, I had just the week before watched a video about a guy who like went to Bahrain. It was his first F1 race, and he went there just because it was like cheap and unique. He wanted a new life experience. He was like, the one thing that I just couldn't get over was how loud the cars were, and they give everyone earplugs and stuff like that. And so I was expecting to be blown away by the noise, and it just wasn't as loud as I expected it to be. But that those V10s and those V12s scream so loud that they pierce your ears. So
Yeah,
kind of
sounds like
want
a
that back.
siren. Yeah, man.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
kind of want that back too. But yeah,
Cool. Well, with that, we will see everyone on the 7th once the Japanese race has concluded. Super excited to talk to you guys. But until then, peace out, everybody.
have a good one. Thank you for listening. Shayem and I would love for you to join the Fan Team Radio community. So please like, subscribe, or follow on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next time.